Alright, hey, what's going on YouTube? Today we're going to be going over some basic editing inside of On1 Photo Raw. So as you can see, I have a handful of images that are already picked here, specifically for these tutorials that I'm going to be doing. And we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So the first picture is one of my favorites. I'm going to just go ahead and open up this lock by clicking on the picture here and then clicking edit, or you can just double click on the picture and it takes you into the develop module. Today we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on just the develop module. Oh, sorry, I guess you do have to click edit. Once you get into the develop module, or the editing module, there's the first tab here on the right hand side that says develop. This is broken up into 4 different sections, and I'm going to minimize the tone and color one. So the first section, you have tone and color. The second one is details, lens correction, and then transform. Most of today's tutorial is going to be inside of this tone curve. So when you open it up, you're going to see that there's a few different options here. The very first one is the camera profile. Clicking through these to figure out which one is, I guess, the image profile that you're looking for, based off of your end result. You just hover over each one of these and you can see what it does to the image, and you'll see that it changes contrast, and then if you notice in the top there, the histogram even moves around, so we're getting some tonal differences as well, which is why this is the tone and color module. Alright, very basic, but I like the On1 landscape, or maybe the vivid. Yeah, I'm gonna go with vivid today. Want something that's a little bit more contrasty. The next step is choosing how you want to process this image. After you've chose or selected your camera profile, if you come over here to the tone portion of the module, you'll see that there's 3 buttons here: manual, AI match, and AI auto. Manual means that you're going to do everything. You have all of the control in your hand. You're just going to click on it, click on each one of these faders down here, or these sliders, and you're going to tweak each one of them one at a time individually. Where I like to start, and I would imagine a lot of people probably like to start, is with something that already has a look to it, unless you know specifically what you're looking for. By clicking this AI match, if you give that a second to process, what this is doing is the preview that you would see on the back of your DSLR after you snap the picture, or your camera in general after you snap the picture. That's what this is bringing. So if you look at it, and you can see what happens here in the histogram as well. I'm going to go back to manual. When you click on manual, it doesn't have as much information consolidated into the middle of the histogram, into the midtones. But as soon as I click AI match, you'll see that a lot of this information here scrunches into the middle, and some of the colors actually start to move to the left and the right of the histogram. Now, I like starting here because this gives me a really good, a really good starting point. Wow, reusing multiple words here. Nonetheless, I like to start at the AI match. The other one that you have is AI auto. Now, what this is doing is making some more deliberate decisions for you, but either way, AI auto or by using the AI match, you get this auto fader bar. You can drag this to the left, and as you can see, I'm getting less of that effect, or you can drag it to the right, and notice that the sliders below it are also changing. So you can kind of, if you don't know anything about exposure, or how to generate the look you're going for, sometimes these auto features, even in Lightroom, by clicking them and seeing what the algorithm inside of the software would do, it can really help you determine what you want to do with your image as well. especially if you're like, all right, I know I have to edit this, but I'm not sure where I want to go with it. This is one of the best things that you could do, is just let the program choose something for you, and then just mess around with the sliders, see what you get, and experiment. No one has to know what it came out like, or no one has to know the problems or the bad images that you produce inside of your own house, if you will. All right. Nonetheless, auto feature, you can click that left and right. I'm going to leave it just about to the max on the AI match, because this is where I really do like to start in On1. And then I think that the photo's a little too bright, and I can come in here and I can change these features. Now, as soon as I let that go, I go back to the manual mode. So I lose the ability to adjust how much of the auto is, or how much of the AI algorithm I want to process the picture. So that's why I'm saying it's good to start here, because as soon as you click and start adjusting these faders, it's going to put you back into manual mode. Now, like I said earlier, I'm going for a more contrasty photo in the basic exposure. Now, there's other ways of getting contrast, but for the sake of keeping this tutorial only in the develop module, I'm going to do the contrast globally. Localized contrast is one of my favorite ways to edit a photo, but that's not what we're focusing on today. All right, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. That'll come in a later tutorial. But moving down to the highlights. Now, one of the keys to using the highlights is to hold down the J key. And what I like to do is, as you can see, I have some peaking going on over here and then down here. Those are all pure white pixels, which means I'm losing information. I don't want to lose information, so I'm going to drag down this highlight fader until those are pretty much gone. I don't plan to print this image, but if you do, you want to make sure that your whites and your highlights aren't blown out. Otherwise, you'll just have an empty spot on the paper and it doesn't print very well. So now my image is starting to take the shape. It's not overly bright. There isn't this crazy bright highlight down here, and we'll edit that a little bit later. Now we move to the midtones. The midtones are all these tones right here in the middle, and as you start to, you'll see as I move it over, the histogram starts to move to the right as I bring up the midtones, and as I bring down the midtones, it moves to the left. Now, I like my images a little bit darker, so I like to bring my midtones down just to the point where, like in the shadow area here, there's still detail, there's still texture. You can tell, that there's some like this was a pretty well composed shot, but I don't want it to be too dark, because I still want to be able to give my shadows some place, a place to play. So as I start to open up the shadows, now the shadows are going to be more in this area of the histogram. And as you can see, I have a lot of blues in this area of the histogram, and that's coming mostly over into this area. This is a blue bar, and the shadows are here, and there's a lot of it, and they're pretty much almost black. Now, I want to bring some of the detail out, some of the color value back in this particular piece. So I'm going to just go ahead and slide this up, and I'm starting to get more of that blue. It's becoming brighter, and you can see my blues are moving over here. Now, I think that that's too bright for what I prefer in my pictures. Like I said, I like my pictures to be a little bit dark. This is something that you can play with on your own and figure out what you like. Now, the most, or not the most important, because this is all artistic, right? Some of the important sliders that you'll have in any develop module is going to be the white and the black fader. What these do is it sets the white point, which is all the way over here, the furthest point before you start to lose detail. So 255 in the RGB channels, that's considered to be white. As you can see, I'm at 201, 204, and 213. So that I'm not clipping anywhere in the white. But as I move this up, those numbers, well, my blue didn't jump too far. Let me see if I can get those to blow out. Okay, well, that's something I learned about this. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So I have to move my cursor. So if you want to see where you are, if you want to see if anything is blown out in the image, you move your cursor, you get your magnifying glass, and it hovers over on this here, whatever part you want to check to see what the RGB values are. Like I said before, pure white is 255 in each one of these channels, the red, green, and the blue. So if I pull this over to the right just a little bit more, and then I hover over here, I'm at 234, so that's not blown out. So if I hold down J, as you can see, this isn't blown out. But if I come over here, look at that. I have blue, I'm losing detail in my blue, green, and red channels in this particular point. So that's why you hold down the J key. It looks for anything that's greater than 255. I'll bring this down just before I lose that detail. And it looks like I'm clear here. And then the black, we want to pull this down just until we start to see some blue peaking parts, so that when I pull it this far down, you can see that there's some blue parts that are peaking, which means that it's pure black, and it's just going to print pure black. But I don't want anything to be pure black in this picture because this is not, that's not my style. I do like dark contrasty photos. So that's where I'm going to put my black point. That means I have a good tonal range between the darkest point in the picture to the brightest point in the picture, which my brightest points are here, and my darkest point was right underneath here in that shadow, which makes perfect sense. And these pieces that are under here, and this is where I would usually stop with my development, because I would go into local contrast underneath the local area here, or I would go into effects and then mask in some of the effects that I want to put if I want to open up this shadow area here, or if I want to darken this down just a little bit so the eye really comes to this lock, things of that sort. But we're not doing that today. Promise those will come. Moving down in the tone and color module, we have some structure. Now, structure is kind of like clarity, right? And if I know that I'm not going to print this, I might crank this a little bit more, but I'd rather sharpen a different way. And this is not necessarily sharpening anyhow. In my images, I like to sharpen just the point that I want people to actually look at. So I don't really mess with structure too much. In this photo, it actually doesn't look so bad because there's no person in this image. Everything is very rigid. The grass that's in the background, that's all blown out, so there wouldn't be any structure to really get out of that anyhow. Everything has a very clean, straight, ergonomic like type line, so putting a little bit of structure in here is okay. Haze. This is really good for landscape photos. If you end up with some fogginess in your image, you can bump this up or pull it down, and as you can see, what it does to the overall image is it moves your RGB values either collectively to the left or collectively to the right. The exact algorithm I'm not aware of. I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to use it in this photo. However, if you ever move a fader and you're like, oh man, I want to get this back to where it was when, like, I want to reset this, you could double click on haze, or I'm sorry, double click on the title of whatever the fader is, and it'll put it back to the 0 value. Okay. Next piece inside of the tone and color module is your actual white balance. Now, I shoot my white balance in camera usually the way that I want to shoot my white balance. Sometimes I like to change it in post, but I typically choose my white balance ahead of time, so that way I like to think what my pictures are going to look like in the end once I take them. It's just my creative process. But say for instance you're like, I have absolutely no idea how I want my white balance to go. You can come through here and you can hover over and reselect your white balance, and this is really going to change your colors. If you look at the histogram, like my histogram is jumping all over the place. Tungsten is used if you're shooting something with tungsten lights that are fairly orange. There has to be a lot more blue into the color balance to counteract that. If you're shooting in the shade, then it believes that your tone values are going to be a little bit more blue, so it's going to add a little bit more reds into the highlight areas and into your shadows, because it believes that your blues are going to be heavily strong or really strong. Fluorescent, more blues because the light is going to be a little bit more orange. Fluorescent light bulbs are the kind that are in most homes. You put them in your lamps next to your couch or sofa, or however you want to say it. A flash is usually daylight balance, but it's so bright and powerful that there is its own setting. And then of course daylight, that's just going to be if you're out in the sun. If you look at what I have here, between daylight and the custom setting, the only difference in the white balance is that the daylight is a little bit more blue in the tone, and in my custom you'll see in the top of the lock that it turns a little bit more orange, and you can even see it in the blue rail that the lock is attached to. And I'll go ahead and hover over this, see if it'll let me. Yep, it'll let me come out here. So when you look over in the when I move it to custom, you'll see that this is going to turn a little bit more orange, and that's because of the daylight. Or I'm sorry, that's because of the warmth in my tone. You see how that turned a little bit more orange? That's what I want in this photo, because I want this to be a little bit warmer image. That's the vibe that I'm going for, and that's achieved with this temperature slider. So if you move the temperature slider over to the right, it's going to put more yellow into your image. If you move it over to the left, it's going to put more blue into your image. Now, I think this is, again, one of those two-taste things, right? I double clicked it, it put it back to 0. I can come over here and I know that it was at 12. I'll hit enter and I get back to the white balance that I prefer for this photo. Now, you can move your tint around, and you got to be careful with the tint. You move it too much and you start to get some really odd colors, especially on the magenta side. This is something that you would probably do for a little bit more creative type work. I don't find myself moving my tint around too much, usually because the white balance, when I shoot it in camera, it's just about where I want it to be, especially when I select the white balance the way that I want it to be. And then I'll just move my temperature slider, and that usually gets me where I want to be. Now, the next thing that we have that affects the color is saturation, right? How intense are the colors in the image? Now, if you move this all the way down, you get a monochrome or a black and white image, which this is a way of making black and white images. I don't recommend this way because you don't get any you get some contrast, but you lose your color response. again, for a later tutorial. Or you can move it all the way to the right and make it look like this neon-y, really interesting thing. All right. Obviously, you're going to have to choose where you want to sit your saturation. Typically, or usually, there's not too many people who push it all the way to 100% unless they're going for something very specific. I find myself taking saturation down because where I really like to adjust the color in my photos is inside of the vibrance. Again, this is something that you should play with and see what happens with your images. But I know that vibrance in my images, I like the way that it very subtly adds some color to the image. And as you can see, this outline of the lock, I'm just not liking that. It looks like it wasn't organically in the photo, and that I added this in through compositing. So I'm going to bring this back down to about 15 where it was, and that line is not as deliberate anymore, so it looks a little bit more natural. When I took this photo, the focus was right here. Obviously you can tell it was right here. I was really trying to get these locks. I was using a 40mm macro lens on a D5200 APS-C camera. So that has a 1.5 crop factor, which is really just half of whatever it was. So I was really sitting at about 60 millimeters, give or take, when I took this photo. So my plane of focus, or my focal plane, was right around in this area. Okay. The next thing and the last things, in On1, I don't really mess with these as much, but you can change the way that your highlights render a little bit. And I like to leave the color value in my highlights the way that they are, but as you can see, when I pull this over to white, it desaturates the highlighted areas, and it makes the photo look a little grungy. So if you find that you're starting to get some really odd color tints in your highlights, then this might be a good way to minimize those color tints. Really powerful. And the same thing with their shadows. If you find that you're getting some really strange looking colors in your shadows, start moving that over to the positive side, if you will, and you'll get rid of some of that color. So that's it for the tone and color module. The rest of these are pretty straightforward. Look, in preparation for this video, I tried to find good things to say about this detail panel. If you are an On1 user and the detail panel, you have figured out how to use it, please message in the box below, because I can absolutely use some education on this. But I have found better ways of getting the sharpening, and I don't even like the noise reduction. So whenever I work in On1, I usually send my photos to Photoshop, and I'd work on my noise reduction there. But I don't mess with it so much in On1. In fact, I'll turn off the detail panel because I don't use it. But I will show you how to use it, because what good is a tutorial if I don't teach you how to use the things inside of the module that I'm talking about? All right. So if you click on the low, it's in theory, and again, I put it on low, but the amount is at 50, and to me, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. In fact, what it really looks like it's doing is it's softening the image, and I think that's because of this. You know what? I wonder. Let me take the luminance down, and then let's see what happens. Still, very. It's not very good sharpening. Like, I'm looking at the numbers here, and I'll zoom in to 100%. And when I click on, I'm turning it on, like even at 100%, and I have the sharpening amount up to 74, like it just doesn't, I'm not seeing it. And it's a very subtle change. And like you have to be super pixel peeping. You have to be super pixel peeping to even see that there was some sort of a change. So I don't like the detail panel, but in theory what you do is you can probably click default, manage this all on your own. The threshold doesn't seem to make that much of a difference, because if I crank it all the way up, it still didn't do anything. And if I bring it down to like 3 and then turn it on and off, still not getting anything. So On1 needs to, either one, I need to get educated, or two, On1 needs to fix this. And then this photo, if I remember, yeah, it was at 100 ISO, so I have no noise to really adjust in here. But like any other photo editing app, when you pull the luminance over to the right, what you're losing is some of the finer contrast and detail to get rid of some of that noise grain. So in order to bring back some of that detail, what you need to do is pull up your detail slider, and what you'll start to see is the detail coming in here. But there wasn't any noise for this image to really clean up, so it's kind of challenging to show you how the luminance fader works on this particular image. I think this part works fairly well, but I still like to get rid of my noise whenever I work inside of On1 in Photoshop. I prefer to send my images for the noise over to Photoshop. I'm more comfortable there. That's just a preference. And then if you start to see some color fringing, or you get some color noise in there, discoloration, you can just move this color fader up and it'll get rid of some of the color noise, and then again you can bring back the details. So again, I'm not a fan of the detail module, but if you know how to use it, please let me know. Lens correction. Lens correction is probably one of my favorite my favorite modules, only because there are some barrel distortions at times with the lens, and when you have the lens profile, like this one is very minor, which on macro lens I usually don't see as much distortion, but on some of the more wide angle lens, I have a 11 to 16 millimeter Tokina lens, and whenever I take images with that, it's like the warp tool. But if you'll know it when you see it. But I leave this on auto. Not much to talk about in here. If your lens does not read, then what you can do is you can come down here where it says the make and click in the drop down. It brings up a series of lens choices. Some of these are going off the recording here, but brings up a series of lens choices. You choose the lens that you have, and then you choose the make, you choose the lens that you have, and there are profiles built into it. Now, if you don't like the way that the profile renders, you can click on manual, and then you can move the distortion. But I have found, and I know many of other photographers that I've talked to, no one really messes with these features all that often, just because it doesn't, I don't know, there's no need for it. All right, the last one is another module that I don't really use all that often, is the transform module. And I'll show you what it looks like, or what you can do with it. If you're shooting any type of architect or something where you're like, oh man, this just doesn't look the way that like it it doesn't, the camera was slightly off, and you want to transform the way that the pixels kind of lay on the canvas, right? You can adjust a lot of stuff inside the crop and level and stuff like that, but what you don't get inside the crop and the level, or the crop tool, is this keystone feature. So it looks like there's just a rectangle here, but as you start to move these points, you realize you're changing the perspective of the overall image. So if I want to make this a little bit more warped, and I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes only, I click apply, and now my image is laying upward a little bit more, and you can tell by this being elongated, and it looks like this is starting to turn towards us, and we can see a little bit more under here. I am not a fan of that, so you can either just hit the transform, turn it off there, or you can hit the reset button on the module, and it'll bring you back to where you were. But you can change vertically, just like so. Again, double clicking on the name brings it back horizontally. If I want the photo to aim out a little bit more, I can do that. If I want to go this way, it's like the free transform tool inside of Photoshop. I can even zoom in on it a little bit and change the scale of the image. Now this could be useful if you are like when you start to layer images on top, and you want one image to be the background, and then you want the same image to make like this like a mirror effect or a zoomed in look. You can do that. I'm not going to though, because I actually framed this exactly that way. This is another bar that this is attached to, and it was very intentional for the shot. And then aspect ratio, you can get really wonky with it. I don't ever mess with it personally. I usually, everything I shoot comes straight out of the camera at the aspect ratio that it has, and then I crop the images down into the aspect ratio that I actually want to work with. So again, I don't mess with the transform, but overall, that is the develop module inside of On1. If you found this tutorial helpful, I know I rambled a lot, hitting the subscribe button, smashing a like, leaving comments, all that stuff, it does help. And if you really want to see more content on On1, I'm going to be producing a lot more content that is around the On1 photo editing app. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and then hit the bell bell icon so you can get notified when I drop a new video. And we can continue to work on the On1. I don't see as large of a community of people using On1 that are on YouTube, so I think we can all work together to enjoy some On1 sourcing here. But hopefully this was helpful. You can find me on social media at Free Will Photos on Facebook, and then also Free Will Photos on Instagram. Links will be in the description. Until next time, continue to create and be inspired by that creativity. Peace.